and give those to the people that they encountered, villagers, in exchange for indulgences, a coin that they would take bring to the church. So this ideal of providing art to the general population and sharing that art with them was something that motivated me even as a student. But in terms of African American artists, you know, it took a while before they had an opportunity to even practice the printmaking medium. Primarily that started during the WPA program in the US, but just for 2 years, 1931 and 33. And then the Republican Congress brought it to an end. In that WPA program had artists like Augustus Savage, you may have heard of Augustus Savage, and a few others. My teacher was Robert Blackburn, great master printmaker, who studied with Augustus Savage. Bob was the first certified African-American master printer in the country. And there have been a very small number, and some of you know those master printers. Ron Adams, Stovall, there's only been a few. And what they've been able to bring with them historically is a long tradition. Dr. Ash was another one. A long tradition of making art available to the public. I was asked this question earlier, what got me into printmaking? And I explained it was by accident. I was a painting student at the Cleveland Institute of Art, and there was a activist in the community from South Africa, and her name was Tandy. She was asking artists to make prints that would then be sold to support the ANC in South Africa. This was before the end of apartheid, and I was very excited to participate. So I snuck into the print studio at night and I made a print. And I was so struck by, I don't know if I described it as a great print, but I was so struck by this whole idea of prints being shared with large numbers of people. You know, you have a painting on the easel, one painting, and maybe a limited number of people could afford that painting. But prints were the most democratic form of art making because it was designed to be shared with others. And it goes back to a long European tradition of that. And as I mentioned, that tradition was invigorated in the United States by a number of printmakers that came from Europe. Stanley Hayter was one of them, who started a shop in New York City. I had a number of artists of color work with him, and Blackburn was, of course, inspired by that tradition. Now, Bob had certain challenges, and the challenges were that he was a man of color. So he didn't get a lot of the recognition that he deserved at that period of time. For example, he was printing Rauschenberg, de Kooning, Jim Dine, and these artists did not list him as a printer. He told me once the reason he created his workshop because they would make him stay in the back room, never allow him to come forward and socialize with these artists. Now there's a very famous print in the hallway of the MoMA called The Accident by Robert Rauschenberg, and you see a line right through it. Bob Blackburn was the master printer. He was printing the large limestone. It was going to the press, and there's a scraper bar on the top. It's a little different than etching or lead printing. And there's a lot of pressure, and the scraper bar has a leather strap on it that pushes the plate down, a tin plate, and the paper, and the ink comes off the surface of the stone. And the stone has a very delicate surface, very much like skin when you look at it and touch it. The stone cracked. Bob was devastated. He felt it was his fault that the stone had cracked. Bob leaves the workshop and decides not to print again. He travels to Europe on a fellowship, Rosenwald Fellowship, and rides a motorcycle across Europe doing watercolors. Now these watercolors are very rare, and you see them every now and then. I think we even have one at the Driscoll Center. But it was not Bob's fault. It was just an imperfection in the stone. And Rauschenberg loved it. He said, put them back together, and he brought in Dan Rohn from Yale. Now, I know Dan Rohn because Dan Rohn was my second teacher and my master's. So I studied with Dan, and he said, oh, Robert Rauschenberg loved it. They put it in. It was the most important print in contemporary American art history. And it won the Taipei Award for printmaking. That started a big print revival in the U.S. So Dan asked me, he says, Curlee, I know you're going to study with Bob Blackburn. Can you tell him that it wasn't his fault? Now, Dan was a stutterer, but he could sing beautifully. So when there was anything about, anything risque, he would start stuttering. If it was about race, he would start stuttering. When he looked at me, sometimes he would start stuttering. He says, Curlee, I went to New York City, and I went into Harlem, and I climbed up 3 flights of stairs, and I knocked on the door, and this large black woman came to the door, and he just stuttered. He could not get it out. He said, so now I want you to tell Bob it wasn't his fault. I said, I will not carry this story to Bob. I said, I'm not going to do it. Who am I to dig back in that past for Bob? But the point is that Bob inspired a generation of artists to think about the collective possibilities, the communal possibilities of the process. We work with artists that engage this openness. So the artist will make a mark, we collaborate with that artist. It's not elitist, it's very open-ended, it's very creative. So Mel Edwards brought William T. Williams, which you see the small prints on the end, brought him to my studio, and he said, well, William, I want to let you know this is the next place to heaven for an artist. Because we give you permission, do whatever you want to do. We try to find a way to facilitate it. At the end of that day, William T. says, well, Curlee, how many prints can I make? I said, well, you know, we like small editions. He said, no, you don't understand. How many different prints can I make? So my point is at that same moment, I was well aware that few artists of color were getting opportunities to go to workshops. They weren't being invited to workshops. A lot of it has to do with the market being kind of delayed in celebrating work. Now, with the market the way it is now, it's quite something. I was at a print shop a couple years ago called Flatbed Press in Austin, Texas. And I went out to dinner with the director and master printer, and the director says to me, Curlee, well, I understand you print only artists of color. I says, no. Grace Hardigan, Stephen Antonakis, Richard Anaskevich. Should I go on? Neen Humphreys, should I go on? These aren't African Americans. Is that because I do print African Americans? You think that's what it is. I said, how many African American artists do you print? 0. Couldn't answer the question. So what I'm trying to suggest to you is that what we try to do is create access. And that's what Eileen is doing also with this gallery, is creating access, to give them a platform, to celebrate their creativity, and to make it possible so you can get to it and appreciate it and understand it. And it's your story. I just finished writing an article for a publication. It's the 100-year anniversary of the Cleveland Museum of Art. An article, I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, so they asked me to write this article. So I come to a part in the article where I'm being invited to be a part of a major exhibition there. And that evening, the director was standing next to me, and all these black folks were coming into the museum. He said, I don't know what's going on. He had not seen black folks come into the museum like that. I said, well, you invited me. If you invite me, somebody that looks like me and makes art about their experience, they will show up. He was really nervous. You know? So again, my point is that this work is about access, about a celebration of their creativity, and about the communal aspect of making art. And you play a very important part. You have to understand that. And that doesn't get talked about very much. As a member of the audience and also as an appreciator of the arts and the collective of the arts, you bring this sort of triad into perfect harmony and balance. The art makes the work. The gallerist presents the work. The collector buys the work and supports the system. Without the system, these artists couldn't survive. We see a great deal of attention in the auction houses with our African American artists right now in galleries. That's because they pay attention to the work now. I was called by a gallery owner in New York City, Travis Gallery, about a show they were doing of Africover and Jeff Donaldson. And he says, Curlee, there's just so much attention with this work. Why do you think people are paying attention? I said, because you're showing it. Simply because you decided to show it. So here you have an opportunity. So I'm going to talk to you now a little bit about the processes. Now, I think some of you know I'm at the David C. Driscoll Center with my colleague, Tariq Iran. And that center's mission is to celebrate the arts, especially the legacy of African American artists and the legacy of Dr. David C. Driscoll. and to enhance an appreciation of the field and to replenish, to make sure they're young scholars studying this material. This is all very important. So what I have brought to the process is a knowledge about the printmaking form and the graphic arts form. And we've done a number of images with David, and this is a beautiful book called Evolution that was shown at the Driscoll Center and published. So that book is available too if you want to get it. And you can order a signed copy by Dr. Driscoll, and we'll facilitate that. This is a book I did with Faith Ringo, and you see me here with I had hair then. Something about becoming a professor. See, the smarter you get, the less hair you have. I don't know if you've connected these things, but it's true. But anyway, so this is a book I wrote, a short book I wrote about Faith Ringo. So that is also available. You can order that from Eileen if you like, and it'll be signed to you if you'd like to have that. Now, what is printmaking? Printmaking is a method by which you transfer an image through the print mediums such as relief printing on lino cut or wood, lithography on limestone, monoprint on glass. Bearden did a lot of monotypes and monoprints. Engraving, as well as etching and engraving, is the Leon Hooks piece, Inner City. That's a beautiful engraving. You can see with my jazz pieces, those are relief prints. And then to the left, the blues series is an etching and aquatint. And the piece to that, left of that, which is from the Othello series. I did an Othello series called Reimagining Othello and Sepia. From Othello from my perspective, and this is the meaning of his existence, actually. So a process, for example, multiple colors. The first color you would print would be the lightest color. Then you would block that area out that you want to keep yellow, for example. Then you would print the next color on top of it, going from light to dark. Now that's because of the opacity of ink. You want to be able to, make sure that the previous color is not coming through, but also it's the way artists correct mistakes. And in the final plate, we can make it even larger so we can make sure those borders that are off registration we can capture, and you never see it, and you say, wow, how did I? And then finally the darker colors are dropped on. So it can keep on going. Some of the prints you see here, the serigraphs may have 20 different colors. I do a process called reductive serigraph. This is inspired by Picasso and his reductive woodcuts. He did a big series of his wife, I think it was his last wife, portraits, and they were called reductive serigraphs. These are reductive serigraphs, meaning, what does that mean? The first color we print is a block of yellow. Then we would block it out with a very small brush with a protective fluid called block out, and I paint it right on top of the screen where the yellows were. Then I bring the screen down and put an orange on there. Then I block out that screen. So we're looking at the first color is an open block of yellow, just a rectangle of yellow. And so every time you print, you will remove or protect that area so you can print another. So you imagine doing this 50 times? Now in Mexico, after I finished school, graduate school, I studied in Mexico City and in Oaxaca, Mexico. And they would do color aquatints, and they would use pins, little pins, on the plates and the paper to register, and also buff it with taffeta. The lining women would use in wedding dresses, because what it does is it polishes surface, but it doesn't pull any ink out of the line. So when I teach this with taffeta. So I always ask women, give me those linings to your dress. Not right now, but so anyway, the ideal is that you find ways to facilitate the production of this. So we do a lot of experimental work. Fake Ringo, we switch back and forth from a dark background, and then we build color like the Mama Can Sing. That was a block of black before we put the other colors on top of it, which is harder to do because the black alters the color a great deal. The Joseph Holton, if you look at the Joseph Holton Man and Boat, these are the series of plates made for that, to make that one image. And they have to perfectly register because they're aquatint, not as easy as a screen. Laborious, so every color is hand wiped. And that's an important point about these prints. Prints are not copies, they're multiples. Meaning each image, although it's the same subject, is a bit different every time it's printed because a hand is involved. Pressure, registration, the artist's hand is involved in it. So I want you to keep that in mind, that they are originals, and of course, far more affordable than the singular painting. And again, extremely democratic in that they broaden the appreciation of the arts and celebration of the arts, and they give you access to the high arts and the fine arts. I have a book here, I'm going to leave with that one that talks about printing techniques and language of printmaking. And these are some of the artists I've worked with. Of course, Bob Blackburn, Faith Ringo. Still had hair when I worked with Faith. And Ron Cright, Al Loving, Paul King, David Briscoe, Sam Gilliam,